Good morning. You know, you sing a song like It Is Well, and it just underscores again how much we really desire to have that sense of peace in one's life. It is by far an understatement to say that in this world we all have our share of troubles. And we do our best to fill our days with not only a sense of meaning, right, but a sense of purpose, perhaps provision, health. These are the kinds of things that we want to see take place in our life. We like to strive after a sense of well-being and wholeness. We want to experience at the very core of our being like rest. A rest from stress, a rest from striving. Really, we just want peace. You know, in the Old Testament, there is a word for peace. It's like a jewel. It's got multi-facets to it. You've heard the word. It's called shalom. The word shalom has numerous contexts by which meaning is brought out of that word. So while shalom means peace, it also means a sense of wholeness. It means to be healthy, to be complete, to be prosperous. It could also mean salvation. One of the illustrations in the Old Testament of this word is found in the story of Gideon. Gideon was asked to go and march against the armies of Midian. And the Midian armies were declared as being as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. And so Gideon was asked to put out a call among all the men of Israel in that day. And the call came 24,000 strong. And then God said to Gideon, I want you to tell these men, if anybody's afraid, really doesn't want to fight, that they can go home. Not exactly what you want to say, right, when you're going up against a war, but that's what he did. And you know what happened? 14,000 of those men went home. So now Gideon's asked to fight this war with 10,000. And then there was another test, and that test decided the way it fell out. You had 9,700 and 300. And God said, tell the 9,700 to go home. And so now Gideon was left to fight with 300 against the armies of Midian, as we said, that were more numerous than the sky, the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Would you be at peace in that moment? Let me tell you a little bit about Gideon, though. Previous to that, you ever hear that expression, I'm going to throw out a fleece? It's an expression that's found in that story of Gideon, because when God spoke to Gideon, Gideon wanted to make sure that he heard this right. And so God made these affirmative statements into his life, but Gideon was like, well, I'm not really sure. So here's what we're going to do, God. I'm going to ask you, I'm going to put out a fleece, and I want it to be wet all around the fleece, and I want the fleece to remain dry. So he goes to bed, wakes up, and it's just like he wanted it. But he wasn't totally convinced yet. So he says, okay, how about if we do it this way? How about if I throw out the fleece again, and this time you make the fleece wet and everything else around it dry? And it happened like that. The idea of throwing out a fleece is really not so much a sign of faith as it was a sign of unbelief on Gideon's part. But Gideon goes and fights this war with 300. And the way they set this up, they were in this valley. The camps of Midian were all around this valley. And on the foothills all around the valley, they stationed these 300 men. And they waited until it got really dark. And they lit these torches and they put them in these clay kind of pitchers, hiding the light. And then on a blow of a trumpet, they smashed the clay pitchers. The light shone. And for the people that were in the midst of the darkness in that valley floor, they saw this light completely surrounding them. They thought the armies of Israel were far more than just the 300, and they started to fight with each other until they sent all the armies scattering abroad, and they won the day. Gideon had an opportunity to think about that event, and he set up a monument on that place. And you know what he called it? He called it, "The Lord is Peace." Yahweh Shalom. That was the name of that place. Because whenever he would look back, he would remember how God brought not only deliverance, but God brought this sense of wholeness, this sense of completeness into his life. And that, I think, is the kind of peace that we want to experience when life happens. When there are trials or conflicts, when there's suffering. We want to see that this peace that God is offering is ours. I think of what we're going to look at today, and James is going to draw a comparison between two various types of wisdom. The one wisdom will create stability, the other instability. One will be peaceable, and the other one will have all kinds of discord. James is going to argue that the wisdom that comes from heaven is the wisdom that we're going to find full of peace and will create peacemakers. So I want you to take a look in your sermon notes page for the passage that we're going to look at today as we discuss this topic of the good life. And I'm going to begin reading with verse 13. It says, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual. It's of the devil. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, and then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace raise a harvest of righteousness." James is going to begin his talk here with a question. And that pertinent question is this: who is wise and understanding? Who is wise and understanding? That phrase in and of itself is a phrase that appears many, many times in the course of the Old Testament, especially in some of the wisdom literature that we find in the Old Testament, like the book of Proverbs. So here's one that almost takes that question right off the pages. It's found in Proverbs chapter 3, and it's the challenge that is really before us. We want to be able to answer this question in the affirmative. Who is wise and understanding among us? And then let's be able to give a really good answer to that question. So Proverbs 3, beginning at verse 13, says this: "Blessed is the man who finds wisdom, the man who gains understanding." See, that person is blessed, but you do notice that they have to find it. They have to gain it. It's something that is going to take an effort on your part. Whoever wants to be blessed, it says they have to be in pursuit of this wisdom, and they have to gain understanding. But notice what he says about the pursuit of this wisdom and understanding. It says she is more valuable, more profitable than silver, and yields better returns than gold. She's more precious than rubies. Nothing you desire can compare with her. You think of wisdom like that? Do you think that the attaining of wisdom, godly wisdom, is of more value in your life than gold, than precious silver, than rubies? If you were given an opportunity to make that kind of choice, what would you choose? Would you choose the silver and the gold and the rubies? Or would you choose to live your life by this godly wisdom? Now, before you answer that question too quickly, let's go on and see what else wisdom has to offer, because it's saying that it has value. But why does it have value? Notice it says here, it says, long life is in her right hand. You want a long life? It says, then live it by wisdom and understanding. How many of our lives are cut short because of bad wisdom? How many of our lives, instead of being a long life, they're cut short because of detours that we've taken on a road that has just brought about our own demise? Or how about this? It says, long life is in her right hand, in her left hand are riches and honor. How about this? How many times in a pursuit of not godly wisdom, but a different kind of wisdom, we've wound up losing a whole lot of money. We've lost opportunities. We've lost the ability to get ahead because the fruit that came out of poor decisions has complicated your life in such a way that it has robbed it of peace. It has robbed it of this shalom, this sense of wholeness. It says her ways are pleasant ways, and all her paths are, say that word out loud with me. That's the word shalom. So wisdom and understanding, all of her ways in a person's life will bring a sense of wholeness. It'll bring this sense of completeness, deliverance, prosperity, all the words that come when you think of that one word, shalom. That sense of peace that comes into a person's life will come as a result of us gaining wisdom and understanding. And then notice it says, she's a tree of life to those who embrace her. Those who lay hold of her will be blessed. Now, who wouldn't want to live a life like that? But you see, this is the thing, like right in front of your face, sometimes we have to make these kinds of choices. And in the heat of the moment, God's wisdom doesn't look quite as attractive as the wisdom of this day, because it doesn't seem like this is really what's going to get me ahead. This is what's going to get me ahead. So I hope you really listen today, because we're going to give a definition from James's gospel here about who is wise. You want to know who is wise? Then let's take a look at it, because I believe, and I think you'd agree with me, that the drive to become maybe famous is of higher value for many people in our culture than attaining to wisdom. And fame is fleeting. But wisdom, it says, is a tree of life to those who embrace her. So you don't want to sell yourself short. It says James's wisdom from above. Listen, it's not a wisdom of just how to get ahead in life. The wisdom from James is not just about worldly success, and the wisdom from James is not just about being able to decipher some kind of divine secrets. Because the Spirit of God that lives in the life of every believer has already promised that I will guide you into all truth. So I don't need a special deciphering tool when I have the Spirit of God in me. But the wisdom that James is promising us is a wisdom that is meant, listen, to transform character. That's the wisdom that God is seeking for you and I to really get our hands around. So notice the preferred answer. The preferred answer found in verse 13 of our text says this: let him show it by his good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. To the answer, who is wise and understanding, comes the reply that a person's life ought to be able to answer that question. That the person who it says, let him show it by his good life, that's evidence that affirms that that person is living a wise and understanding life. You want to know who is that wise person, then just take a look at their life. But make sure that you're looking for the right things, because sometimes people could make decisions that may prosper them in the short run, but in the long term, they're being placed at odds with the very God to whom one day you and I will have to give an account. So in the short run, it seems like, hey, that's a really good answer. In the long run, not so much. James is saying that the person who is wise and understanding is a person whose life is affirming that by their good life and by their fruit. Notice it says, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. So good life is now expounded upon by saying it ought to come with good deeds that are done in humility, meaning something that is self-effacing. It's not just about me, that I'm always the one that is at the center of these decisions, but rather there's something else that is at the source, and that is this wisdom that we find is from above. So this preferred answer then is one where it's a godly source. God is behind this. So you want to know who's wise and understanding, it's a person who is demonstrating it by this good life. And the good life is shown by the fruit that it is bearing. People pretend to be living the good life, but their fruit seems an awful lot to be self-serving, rather than serving the purposes of God. Jesus said then, kind of said the same thing, didn't he? Jesus said to his followers, he said this, he says, take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you shall find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Do you hear that? You want wisdom, then you got to put on this yoke. You got to walk with Jesus. And he's telling you straight up that my way is easy. You're going to find rest for your souls. And so James is saying, look, for the wise and understanding who are among you, he says you're going to be able to see it by the quality of their life in the deeds that are done in humility from the wisdom that is from above. Now there's a dreadful alternative. The dreadful alternative is found here in verse 14. It says, but if you harbor bitter envy. See that word envy? It's the word zalon, where you get your word zeal. And the reason why I bring this out is because this bitter envy, bitter could also be something that's harsh, and harsh in the sense of envy, in the way we normally think about it, it has everything to do with, really desiring something that someone else has. But behind that envy is this sense of a misplaced zeal. And so it often can have like a negative nuance. You can be passionate about something, you can be zealous for something, but it could lead to your undoing, right? And the same thing here with selfish ambition. The word ambition is a rare word in the New Testament. In fact, I learned something doing a study that one word, the only place that they find it in the literature of its day was found in the writings of Aristotle in an essay that he wrote on politics. And you know what the word meant? The word that was used, is translated here, ambition, was used to mean the self-seeking pursuit of political power by unjust means. See, so it's all about my desire to get ahead, to be on top, to exercise rights and privileges with that kind of office. It had everything to do with that personal kind of ambition. And so consequently, the contrast between a wisdom that manifests itself in deeds done in humility based on the wisdom from above is now living a life where there's evidence that condemns us, because it's all about me. It's all about my selfish ambitions. It's all about this sense of misplaced zeal and passion. And such wisdom, it goes on to tell us, does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual. It's of the devil. You see that there is this ungodly source of such wisdom. Whereas the other wisdom we're going to find in a moment, it has certain attributes to it. This earthly wisdom, it has everything to do with everything that's based about this life. And it says it's contrary to the things of God. It's unspiritual. And in fact, when it says of the devil, it doesn't just mean that the wisdom comes from the devil. It says that that's how the devil lives. He lives in this manner. So the wisdom that you find in this dark side is a wisdom that it says it really is not leading us anywhere good. Think about this for a moment. I'm sure you could look out and name current, everyday kind of events where the fruit that comes from people's living has severely handicapped them in this life. They've made bad choices using their own wisdom, and they wound up going to jail. They made poor choices about what needed to be filled up inside of this person to make them feel good about themselves, and they placed themselves in harm's way. And some people have had the physical effects of that, whether it's through addictions or extramarital affairs. And that wisdom has wound up to not only breaking them personally, but it could also destroy a home. It could destroy a career. It could lead you on a path that there's nothing good that comes from that. And yet every day we are placed in a position where we have to exercise wisdom. And if we're not careful, we're exercising the wrong kind of wisdom, and as a result, the fruit of that is going to be born into a person's life. That's why when it says, it goes on to say, look, for where you have envy and selfish ambition, notice what is the fruit, the bad fruit that comes from that. It says there you will find disorder. And the word there is instability. It's always rocky. It's never leading to this sense of shalom, to this sense of peace and wholeness. And the result of that, he says, you find every evil practice there. Whatever it takes to get ahead. The end justifies the means. I put aside my reference to character, and I'm just doing what I need to do to make a living and get ahead. Last week we talked about the tongue. And we said it's the smallest member of a body, but it could set a whole forest on fire. That the words that come out of a person's mouth can affect their life and the lives of those around them in terrible ways. I had some discussion with some guys after the thing was over, and they were all commenting like, man, that's a hard way to go, man. And one person said, you know, if I just am honest with myself and with you, like, I think it's kind of hard to be successful in business if you don't kind of like cut the corners. And sometimes you got to tell half-truths, and sometimes you just, because if you want to get ahead, man, that's what you got to do. Really. Now, maybe part of you thinks, yeah, that's true. But you see, then I would say, well, what does it really mean to get ahead then? Because if what I get as a result of getting ahead has placed me in a compromising position with a God that one day I'm going to have to give an account for my life to, then what did I really gain? Let me remind you of a lesson that we looked at back in James chapter 1 and verse 13. Memorize this. If you're a young person, seriously, if you were my daughter, if you were my son, I'd want you to sit down, and I tell them this all the time because this is true. It's found in verse 13. I put it up here on the screen. What we learned going through the book of James was that word tempted is the same word for trials. So tempted doesn't always have to be something that's outside towards me. It's something that could be internal. It could be this trial that I am facing, this like war within. And what it says, when you're tempted, don't blame God. Don't say God's the one who's testing me. God's tempting me. Because see, that's all of this instability that's inside of me, I want to blame God for. Like, why are you doing this? When God, it says here, it says, God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. So God himself is too pure to be tempted by evil, and God says, I will never tempt you with evil. But the fact remains that you and I are still tempted sometimes, right? So what is at the root of that temptation? Well, look at the text. It says each one is what? Tempted when by his own evil desire he is dragged away and enticed. So what is it that drags you away? What is it that entices us? Is it position? Is it promotions, plaudits? We want prosperity? What is it? We want fame? We want recognition? What is it that at the bottom line is what's driving you to make the choices that you are making? That you think somehow or another, if I do X, Y, and Z, I'm going to get here. Because see, sometimes if getting here is what is your desire, then sometimes you're going to do whatever it takes to do that. And that means if I have to step on this person, if I have to shortcut something here, if I have to say a couple of lies, if I have to do whatever, I'm going to do it because what? I want to go here. So what is it that's placing me there? It's the desire that's in you. And so consequently, what is driving you then is decisions that I have to make to achieve what I think is what I really want. And then it says, let that desire in you conceive. And what it gives birth to is sin. You want to be popular. So does being popular mean that I have to compromise my own morality? Does it mean that I have to compromise who I am as a person? I want to feel valued. So does that mean then I can only find that value when I get all these other people to really like me? You can begin to see then how that inside you, this desire, when it's conceived, it says it's going to lead to sin. And sin is just action that's contrary to the actions of God. And it says, and when that is full grown, it leads to death. So you see why this dreadful alternative is really no alternative at all. It's going to lead to one's undoing. But notice here it says that godly wisdom is now explained. It says the wisdom that comes from God is first of all pure, and then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. The good life that was demonstrated by deeds done in humility that comes from wisdom is now given expression to us. This wisdom is now defined. And where does it start? It says it starts with purity, because God is pure. So the wisdom that comes from heaven is pure because God is pure. It's part of God's character. God isn't like a shadow that one minute shows light, the other minute there's darkness. God is light. God's way is true. So if you want to base your life on something that is true, something that's going to prosper you as a person and prosper your family, prosper you, so that you put your head on a pillow at night and it doesn't condemn you, it says this is the kind of wisdom that first of all is pure. You could take it to the bank. It'll lead to long life. And because of that, the fruit that comes, it says that it's peace-loving. That means that you, instead of finding all this disorder, right, Because it says where you find envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. Instead, what you find is that a person who is tuning into God's wisdom and seeking to live that out, they love shalom. They love that peace. And again, it's something that they're pursuing. The word considerate, it's usually associated with justice, particularly the abuse or the avoidance of the abuse of power. So a person who's considerate means that I am thinking of others and not just myself. I'm thinking how this is going to affect the group rather than just me. Submissive means that when God has made his way clear, I find that I can recognize that truth and I willingly submit to it. Does that describe who you want to be? That as you live your life and you're thinking about all those ambitions and all those plans, does it include this? Because see, if it doesn't, you're going to wind up doing whatever you think it needs to happen to pursue what is that desire that's deep inside. And a lot of times, you're going to wind up reaping the fruit of those decisions. And you know how messy that can be. And you know how then sometimes you sit back and you could live life with a level of regret and saying, oh man, if I only. But that kind of life, peace-loving, considerate, submissive, it's seen in the way in which a person acts. And so mercy and good fruit, they go together. Mercy, it's not just showing somebody pity, because sometimes pity could just be the emotion of the moment. But mercy that is driven by the wisdom from heaven is a mercy that shows kindness, that is compassionate. Because see, if God is really working in me, then don't I want to make sure that as much as it depends on me, I am loving my neighbor as myself. So instead of repaying evil for evil, I find ways to repay evil for good, because ultimately good is going to be the victor. And lastly, here it says the final pairs of virtue here of impartiality and sincerity, they go together. Because it talks about a person who's not double-minded. It talks a person here, like the word sincere literally is the word for the opposite of hypocrisy. It's a person who knows the heart of God, and therefore the priorities of God become a priority for me. And I get it. Sometimes that's hard. Sometimes it might seem easier to get what you want and get a little further down the road if you just compromise these virtues. But it has a way of backfiring. Things catch up. But when you live in a manner that patterns its life after the wisdom of God, then there's a life with no regret. And it says here, peacemakers who sow in peace raise a harvest of righteousness. The good life reflects the wisdom that comes from above. I've listed in your note page a number of things that we've learned going through the book of James. We've learned how to deal with trials, because God's saying, my wisdom is such that I use those trials to teach you things. And I'm not against you. I'm for you. Have you ever had experiences in your life where sometimes they just leave you flat and you're just wondering like, oh man, what am I going to do? Well, what does God say? He says, ask me. He says, ask me for wisdom. I'll give it to you. You know, one of the things you'll never hear God say is, oh, you again? Really? I mean, I told you like 100 times already. See, it says in the text that God gives to every man willingly. So why would we not run to him to ask him to inform my life and my decisions? That's the way God works. And then he gives us all kinds of examples. Don't show favoritism, because that's not wisdom. You got to love people for who they are. Maybe things in your life, happened in a certain way, but for other people, they didn't have quite the same sense of blessing. Maybe their homes were a little bit more troubled, and so now you can speak into their life a little bit. Maybe you could show some kindness where there was no kindness. Maybe you had parents who were more instructive in your life, and this person over here grew up without parents. It's making you sensitive to the needs of people around you, trying to put on the mind of God so that you live in wisdom. Didn't he tell us how to use our tongues? Did he not tell us that faith without works is dead? So you don't work for your salvation, but you work out your salvation. It's like a tree. If it's an apple tree, the most natural thing in the world for it to do is what? Produce apples. God's saying if you're really a believer, if you've named the name of Jesus, then you ought to act like a believer. Otherwise, you may deceive yourself into thinking you are a believer when you're really not. All you're doing is playing Halloween. I get dressed up in this costume. Look, I'm a Christian. But it's just a costume. I want to give you just one concrete example for this as we close. Every year we have an opportunity to gather together and partner with Help for Haiti and an organization called Feed My Starving Children. The whole church gathers there together. And we have brought out over 500 people at a shop just to come and pack food. And it's for the whole family, young, old. Everybody has an opportunity to get involved, even the young kids. Everybody has an opportunity to participate in this kind of help. And you know what has been the results of that? Since 2011, we have provided over 500,000 meals to the children in and around the orphanage in Marmalade, Haiti. You get on Google and you put in that city, and you ought to know that the work that you did on this particular day helped to provide meals for kids in that city. What we've also done is taken 10% of those overall meals and we have distributed them to the orphanages in and around Marmalade. So here's the point that I want to make with you. Wisdom says that I want to get involved in the things that touch the heart of God, right? And I want to express that in a way that shows love for my neighbor. Do you remember Jesus saying something similar to this? It says, if you have fed the least of these, it's as if you did it unto me. Doing it unto the least of these, it says, it's as if you've done it for me. So why would we not want to get engaged in a way that helps relieve the plight of starving children? Even for a day. What's so pressing on a calendar that you can't make room for like 3 hours? Because the food that is collected fed those children. It fed them for the day. Sometimes it's the only meal those kids get. What do you think those kids think about when mealtime comes and they're eating and they're told that this food was given by donations of churches and Christians from other parts of the world here that thought enough about their plight that they entered into it? How about if you were one of those kids' family members? Most of them are orphans, right? So they they've been given up, but what about other family members that maybe could not provide for them, but they still love them? You think that helps them to feel good about people and life, that knows that people cared enough about them to step into that gap? What does it do for a community? See, the wisdom that is from above is a wisdom that's peace-loving, considerate. It's sincere, impartial, full of mercy and good fruit. That's just one example of a way in which we as a church, a whole body, can get together and do something positive that pleases the heart of God. There are numerous ways that happen in the course of a year. You heard today in our announcements, we, as a church, we support First Love Ministries. That's part of Bob and Bobby Clinton. They work in Nepal, and he's been there throughout this whole crisis. Was interviewed for ABC News. Those are feet on the ground, people helping in the midst of great crisis. And he does what he does because of our contributions of helping. Look, the wisdom that comes from above is a wisdom that will bear great fruit in your life. You could choose to live another way, but it's filled with disorder, and it will compromise who you are as a person. So the answer, who is wise and understanding, can only be answered by the person whose life demonstrates that wisdom from above. Deeds done in humility based on that wisdom. May that be said of you. May that be said of me. May it be said of Bethany Church as a whole. Let's live the good life. Let's pray. Father, I want to thank you for this word. I want to thank you for making it clear the choices that we have to make in this life. What's at stake? I pray that we have ears to hear and eyes to see. I pray, Lord, that the distraction of a day may not just minimize these words that we hear today, but that they might stick. Stick in a way that in the moments of our greatest temptations, it'll cause us to take a look at really what is motivating that. So that our hearts and our minds, Lord, may be stayed on you. Because the result of that will be life and peace. And we'll be careful to give you all the praise in Christ's name. Amen.